and welcome to another episode of the Drawing Room Experts. This is Zaib, and this is a very personal discussion, and um, इस इस बारे में मैंने बहुत सोचा कि मैं इसको किस तरह से how should I carry this out. But I think it's best to leave it, as ad hoc or ad lib as possible for me, because I also don't want it to be like super speechy, like, right, or preachy, probably is the right word, um but it's a discussion that I wanted to have, and I honestly don't care, um in this particular instance, that what people would think of it, or if people will even watch it, if it's too boring or dull or too, like I said, preachy. I think that's beyond the point, for me this time, because I think it's important. One of the reasons why I started this podcast was so that I can share my opinions, um, and I feel like, there might be some people out there who will agree with it. A lot of people would disagree with it, but regardless, I think it's important for me to let this out, and as I've said numerous times, it's like a therapy, um, therapeutic session for me. Doing these podcasts, especially the ones that I do, all by myself. So it's important कि मैं इन पे बात करूं, उन topics पे बात करूं कि जो, it's important so that I can process them out of my system. So, as you all probably would know, and if you don't, let me just give you a quick recap. Okay, the first week of 2021 was a very brutal week, not just in the US, very crazy week in the US, but I think back home in Pakistan has been even more crazier. Not because there's something new happened, like unlike in the US, where I think the last attack on the Capitol Hill was way back when the Britishers um, were attacking the Republic at the time, and probably the 18th century, if I'm not mistaken, or 19th century. Um, and then ever since that was the last time the Capitol Hill was attacked, and this is ever since that, this is the this week saw another attack, if you want to call it, on the Capitol Hill. So in Pakistan, however, it wasn't like it wasn't there wasn't something that happened which was happening for the first time, as is the case with us in so many instances. The Hazara community has been ravaged and destroyed and killed and murdered brutally for the past 20 odd years, and we've seen numbers go high up to thousands of people who've been dead and murdered because of violent extremism. So in the chain of those events, there was another event happened, and unfortunately, our people, I feel like, even myself to an extent, we're bored of it. We're bored to an extent where it doesn't really do anything for us, because I remember what it used to. Whenever we heard about this the first time, was कि इसका एक बड़ा impact होता था. You think about like death and all, why is this happening, what are we going to do, how are we going to stay safe, and it used to bring the community and the countrymen together. But I think now it does the complete opposite. Nobody cares about that. What it does is that it opens a Pandora's box on opinion, and usi ke upar, like, I don't want to focus on the tragedy itself, because it's been spoken to death all this week. But as I try to do with a lot of my podcast, I want to focus on an element of the incident. If I'm talking about an incident, I want to focus on an element of an incident that will live a life of its own. So it's not going to be just attached to this one event, but it opens a broader discussion. So for me, a broader discussion warrants, broader discussion is warranted, on on privilege, and that's what I want to talk about today. Okay, what is privilege, and and what should one do, you know, to realize that they're living in privilege? Because a lot of people, when they open their mouth, um, they are reeking of privilege, and that's unfortunate because in their head they're probably talking about some logical answers, and you know they're probably suggesting a solution to the problem. And I appreciate the thought, but I think more thought needs to be put in place before opening one's mouth. There's a reason why I don't touch, you know, certain topics like women's rights or you know, African Americans keep plight. Although I did talk about it, you know, in a couple of episodes before, but that was again from a Desi perspective, and not really from like a civil rights perspective. And even then, I was a little uncomfortable talking about it because I didn't want to talk about it myself because it just sounds so rich. Okay, I don't go through what the African Americans go through, and for me to just talk about, you know, what's going on, maybe I can, you know, condemn it and be all supportive, or be an ally to the African American community from that perspective, yes. But I'm never going to talk about it from a perspective of problem, solution, future, history, and all of that stuff because, excuse me, I have nothing to do with them. Nothing to do with them from a perspective, okay, um, I haven't faced their problems. I honestly, I can read all about them. You know, I can watch as many movies as I want, but I'll never be in a position to actually relate to it at a level which is personal, um, uh, from that racist perspective. So, it's what I say, man. You know, I don't delve into women's rights and, you know, plight of the African Americans and all of that stuff. I can sympathize with them, but I just don't talk about it, especially the women's right thing. God knows how many times I wanted to talk about it, but I just was I was sure, okay, the moment I open my mouth, it's going to sound as if I'm um, um, out of out of my, you know, out of my depth talking about it. So, um, why do I feel like I want to talk about privilege here? Is because I want the reason why I gave you that example is that's how I think when I'm talking about certain things. And why I can talk about, you know, the genocide of the Shias in Pakistan, specifically the Hazaras, why I can talk about those things is because I am a Shia and I've lived in Pakistan for a huge portion of my life, and a majority of my life. Just lived in the US for 6 years, um, and I've been in positions where, you know, you genuinely fear for your life. Nobody else can, you know, and even from that class that I am, उसमें भी like there are extremes, right? There are certain people who are more in danger, and उसमें, you know, um, they go through an extreme nature of that persecution, compared to others. Um, so even within a class, even if you are part of like a persecuted class or, you know, affected people, um, you still can't relate 100% across the board, end to end, to everyone. That's why I find it really, really sad that certain people just open their mouth and they talk about, you know, certain things like the Shia genocide, and offer their insight and solutions and, you know, opinions about it. By all means, you know, they have their own mouth and they can talk about whatever they want to talk about, but I just wish that there was this certain level of assessment before you know, one would open their mouth. So, and you know, it's ridiculous because they use certain terms like, and I've, you know, made notes about this too. Just wanted to make sure that I don't, you know, delve into other things that I probably don't want to talk about. but the classic example is that ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए, ऐसा करें, and do this, do that, and protest in a certain way or a certain manner, or इससे क्या फायदा होगा. And we've heard all of that throughout this week, where these Hazara miners were brutally killed. Iske reaction mein, so many people talked about this, and so many people mentioned ke um, uh, uh, protest कैसे करनी चाहिए, protest क्यों होना चाहिए, क्यों नहीं होना चाहिए. And then that got me thinking ke, we saw that in the US as well. Like जब मैंने uh, Black Lives Matter के ऊपर एक episode किया था, तो one of the things that I mentioned in that was ke, when you are speaking from a position of privilege, first of all, like I said, you need to recognize and acknowledge ke you have privilege, right? For example, मैं women's right पे बात नहीं कर सकता because I have privilege, because I'm not a woman. I can't relate to their issues. I can't really speak alone. I could probably have a woman talk about this, and maybe learn from them, listen to them, hear them out. Um, but I recognize my privilege because I'm not in that position. So first of all, it's important to recognize privilege. Number two, it's 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 important to know that when you're trying to give solutions, you sound like a total dumbass, because when you're speaking from a position of privilege, you cannot like you speak from a position of I would say almost relaxed, right? You're cool, you're calm, and you're collected. You can make decisions. ऐसा होता है ना कभी कि when you are in a very difficult spot, so what you do is um, you make a decision, you make a call, and then down the line, when you look back at it and say, you know what, I think I should have done this or that better. Hindsight is always 2020. तो आप जब hindsight में किसी चीज़ को देखते हो, be not with the pressure and the positions, situations जो आपको मिलती है उस heat of the moment पे, you tend to make probably better decisions, or you make decisions which are hindsight. So, and hindsight is always 2020. So when people who are not going through this persecution, they all when they present their ideas and they present their solutions and they present their analysis, they sound to me as if they're looking at it from a hindsight perspective, because A, they don't have to go through this. B, they're not in those positions. They're anyone's shoes, not even close. मैं चाहूँ तो मैं using the fact that I'm a Shia, I can talk about the plight, but I can't really. I'm not Hazara. So the fact that I'm a Shia, I'm probably in the Shias, I'm probably more privileged in that sense, where I can't be recognized as a Shia as opposed to Hazara. Hazara people are very easily recognized. So now I'm not gonna be stupid and talk about their plight when I'm not in their shoes. What I can do is present myself, as a punching block, someone who can listen and understand what they, and provide them a platform of sorts, right? That's the most I can do as an ally. But that's me, even within that community that I'm a part of. कि मैं इस तरह से इसको देख रहा होता हूँ. But people who are not even part of that community, they're so comfortable giving hindsight 2020 type analysis. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and maybe this is probably a better way to approach it. Don't play the victim card. I've heard this too. um, on principle, I agree. On principle, I honestly don't have an issue with that. I think principally playing the victim card sounds like you are how should I put this? um, Playing the victim card in my head, what it means is that you are trying to live a life of a victim when you can empower yourself and live a life which is more non-victim, whatever that means, right? The idea is that you should always be rule your circumstances and don't allow them to be ruled Don't allow them to rule you. उस basis पे I understand कि playing the victim card is counterproductive. But how can you play the victim card when you genuinely are the victim? Like there's no two ways about it. Hazara community in Balochistan are a victim. They don't have to play the victim. They are the victim. So what are you suggesting? That don't play the victim? That sounds like get on with it. And that, is an epitome of talking privilege. Because you, from your hindsight 2020, as I mentioned, your perspective, you can say that, hey, aisa nahi karna chahiye, move on. Like life happens, life sucks. Move on. I don't I don't I don't think that sounds right. Um, Another mistake I think privileged people do is that they talk more than they listen. And that I think is the root probably of all evils, because they if they would think that they want to listen more, that would resolve a lot of their issues. So they have so much to say. They give opinions. They talk about, idhar bhi to hua tha, waisa bhi to hua tha, ye kyun nahi hua, waisa. Like they're trying to give solutions. One thing that it's one of my pet peeves, and I hate it when this happens, is this whole idea of um, the state's relationship with a civilian. I think that relationship is upside down somehow. And I'll give you an example, a very small example. I don't want to talk about this because it hurts me when I say this. But it's important for me to talk about it so I can explain this. In the same week, as I was mentioning, just my pura attack hua tha on the Hazaras, and the umpteenth time they were brutalized by extremists. Um, Imran Khan came forward and said something really controversial. He said, while the Hazaras were waiting for him to visit them, um, so that they can bury their loved ones, and they've been protesting for 6 days, 5 days, something like that, and they were demanding that the prime minister come and visit them so that they can, so that they can get assurances that this won't happen again, and then they can, bury their loved ones. Imran Khan sent his federal ministers, and there was a lot of discussion and negotiations, and Imran Khan was insisting that they bury them first before he comes, and they were insisting, no, you come and then we'll bury them. In tug of war, of sorts, Imran Khan uttered the words. He said, "Okay, he, as prime minister, will not allow himself to be blackmailed by these people." Um, Now, it's important to say that since then he has, albeit in a private meeting with people who he eventually met, said that he wasn't referring to them as blackmailers, but the opposition who was trying to take a political advantage out of this. He was referring to them as blackmailers. But if anyone with half a brain, quarter of a brain probably, or even no brain, in all honesty, would listen to that speech, he was talking about the victims, and then calling them as blackmailers. So I want to talk about what's wrong with that statement, and there's God knows there's so much wrong with that statement. But I think I wanted to capture a very important aspect of the discussion that followed when that statement was made, or even before that. A lot of people were saying कि यार ऐसा नहीं हो सकता because he's the prime minister. You can't put in that demand, because then otherwise everybody will put that demand, and the prime minister would have to set a precedent. He would be setting a precedent, and he would have to go everywhere. And prime ministers can't do that. Makes sense, right? To me, no. Because I think that's what I was referring to when I said we have to reassess our relationship with the state. I think what we've done now is elevated state to a level where it's better or bigger than the civilians. And I think that's where this whole logic comes from. कि ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए. Because if I were to think, not even think about the statement, I would say yes, it makes sense. You can't really have a prime minister running around the country, consoling people every time they lose a loved one and whatever happens. I mean, you can't really, do that. But then, like I said in so many of my podcasts, be an open thinker, be a free thinker. Why? Why can't he do that? The answer to that is because he's the prime minister and he's busy. He has so many things to look for. He's the prime minister of the country, not like, just one group of people. And 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 that got me thinking, okay, that relationship that we have developed in our heads between the state and the civilian is messed up. Because in my understanding, and nobody can disagree with this, I'm pretty sure, the state is there to serve the civilians, not the other way around. The state is there to serve, protect, and enhance the lives of its civilians, and that's why they pay taxes, and that's why there's a transaction between the state and the civilians, and whereby the civilians have the upper hand, and um, they they drive that relationships, right? They have the hand, if you like, right? Strictly talking in poker terms, right? So they have the hand, and that's my understanding of a state v civilian relationship. But what we've done now, because the state and civilian, there's so much gap between the two. What we've done now um, is that we're giving reasons to protect the state for them when they're not doing something that they should do. What I mean by that is, okay, we shouldn't justify whatever the state does because they're state. I've seen instances where people are killed innocently by the state, the army or whatever. But it's the state mechanism, right? They kill them or they pick them up, forced forced disappearances, as we know, happens in Balochistan all the time. Um, um, and people justify that saying, yaar, these people were causing trouble, and state has the right. No, state doesn't have the right um, to usurp the rights of its civilians. Civilians have the right to, live, the right to share their opinions, the right to be, legally tried in a court of law, and then, uh, locked up. But state uses that monopoly of violence that they, in my opinion, they should have the monopoly of violence, because if other non-state actors have that, ability to promote and create havoc in the state, then that divides that monopoly. State should have the monopoly of violence, but they use that monopoly of violence to their advantage. They circumvent systems. और इसका क्लासिक एग्जांपल ये है कि अभी तो आप खुश हैं कि बलोच सेपरेटिस्ट्स को, अगर फॉर एग्जांपल assuming that they are separatists and they're causing troubles, and if the state picks them up and they're gone, ब्लैक वीगो को बड़ा मजाक लोग उड़ाते हैं, कहते हैं कि ब्लैक वीगो आ गई, उड़ा दिया. तो अगर वो चले भी गए, गायब कर दिया उनको, या कहीं जाके छुपा दिया, मार दिया, whatever, तो अभी स्टेट ये करिए, that may be, you may agree with that, because it's ends justifying the means. And So you agree with it. But then down the line, if if a state or an army mechanism or the opinions of the state changes, that goes against what you believe, and if they use the same brute force against you, then you won't like it, right? That's why we have law and order in place, जिसमें ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि लोगों की मूड के ऊपर डिपेंडेंट है कि आज स्टेट की पॉलिसी है कि बलोच नेशनलिस्ट्स को उठा लो, कल को स्टेट की पॉलिसी होगी कि एनीबडी हु प्रोटेस्ट अगेंस्ट द गवर्नमेंट उनको उठा लो, तो आप भी उसके लिए पेटे में आ सकते हैं, राइट? सो दैट्स व्हाई वी हैव कोर्ट्स, ताकि स्टेट की मोनोपोली मिसयूज ना हो और जस्टिस प्रिवेल करे. But I feel like people use the the existence of a state and supersede it above the rights of the people. मेरा सीधा सीधा ओपिनियन इसमें यह है कि rights of the people supersede everything. Everything. I mean, the worldview that I have is pretty strict, and I'm very extreme about that. There's no room for there's no room to compromise people's rights. If that means the state has to bow down, so be it. If that means the prime minister has to run around the country consoling people, he should. Why can't he? He's busy. Fuck that. Nothing's more important than the rights of he's there to serve the rights of the people. And if he can't run around the country consoling them, then maybe create an environment where he doesn't have to do that. Maybe ask the FC to get their shit together in Balochistan. Maybe ask the army to get their shit together in Balochistan, and not have them create a position where he has to run around the country consoling people. It's on him, not on you guys as civilians, or not on us as civilians, to adjust ourselves to the likings of the state. That's just my opinion. At the end of this all, I'll just say is be cognizant of your privilege. Be aware that you have privilege. Be aware that when you talk or say anything, you're coming at it from a position of privilege. When you are, right? Because that awareness will drive a lot of good conversations. It's about time that people are, when, like, golden rule in my opinion is, when you are in a place of position of privilege, even if you know that the other person is not doing the right thing, listen, and ask questions. Maybe that that genuinely enlightens you or enlightens the other person, and they say, you know what, someone looking from outside in, maybe they're right. But you can't impose that on the other person when you're not, when you are in that position of privilege. So yeah, know your privilege, and please always remember that the state serves you and not the other way around. Thank you.